Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Lloyd. My name is Paige Medell, and today I'm super thrilled to be speaking with Max about the Constitutional Convention. Before we actually get started and discuss the convention, would you be able to tell me a little bit about your background and what motivated you to represent your community as a delegate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paige. Glad to be here. My educational background is in economics, and before getting to the Constitution, I've been working in tech as well, doing development work. Before that, I was a tech consultant at one of the big four companies. So I was working in between independent software vendors and the subject matter expertise at the big four accounting company, I should actually say, that I was working at. And yeah, no, what brought me to the Constitution, I think it was really the reality of the fact that the world is becoming so much more digital and so much of our lives are somehow connected to the digital realm. And when you just see that there's a large amount of power and time being spent in this digital realm because of it. And it just makes sense that an effort that's attempting to democratize the digital world and ensure that people own their own digital value or their own their own digital footprint makes a lot of sense, and that's really what fascinates me about Cardano's approach, is to try and meld the worlds of science and technology and the way that humans interact with one another as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Starting off
Yeah, of
light,
course.
would you be able to, of course, would you be able to pick a most memorable moment from the convention? And did it shape your understanding of collaborative governance at all?
Yeah, I mean the great memories have been meeting the people for sure. It's fantastic that a such a digital project has real people behind it, and when you put them all together, um, that's been a tremendous amount of fun. So yeah, and also just discussing topics like digital governance and what it could possibly look like with people from all around the world has been fascinating. And it's so heartening to see that this topic is in the hearts and minds of many people spread throughout the globe, and that you're not at all lonely thinking about these things. That's been really great.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. During the convention, delegates achieved what we are saying is really remarkable consensus on a number of issues. Were there any specific instances where you saw all of these diverse perspectives come together?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A couple of places. So I myself come from the Netherlands, and we have a different legal paradigm than many other countries. And I think that's something that was fascinating in the discussions that were had. Is that in the US and the UK you have more of a letter of the law legal paradigm, whereas in the Netherlands it's much more an intent of the law. So that, of course, right from the onset, when you discuss governance and a, a document that needs to framework this entire governance together, you look at this document itself in a different light, right? Where I'm looking at it much more of what is the intent of the parties around it. The My colleagues and delegates from the US and the UK were very much more precise on what is actually being written, and that definitely had fruitful um, results, because you do see it from many more perspectives. And I think another part that came in there was language. We saw that as well, from people who don't speak English necessarily as their native language. That something as a discussion on the word equitability versus fair and impartial, that was definitely a big discussion as well that was had. That's also fascinating. and at the same time, people pushing for progress rather than perfection is also something that's very cultural, right? So I enjoyed that a lot, especially from the delegates from Asia. That I really appreciated at a time where people were getting lost in the minutia and the details. That the broad view could still be set down and said, "What are we trying to accomplish here together?" And that's just a combination of lots of perspectives and people coming together uh, during this entire constitutional convention.
Absolutely. That's really beautiful. I think the equitable conversation is something that stood out to many people. I've heard that come up quite frequently. I think that's so
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. How did you manage to maintain communication with your constituent community throughout the convention? And did they provide any specific insights?
Absolutely, especially at the beginning. So, like I said, the Netherlands has a different has a different legal paradigm where it's much more the intent of the law, and as such, what's very important is supporting and guiding legal documentation to help inform anybody that's trying to give their legal opinion, or in other words, the CC has to give their approval or disapproval on any governance action, and there's lots of things in that. But in the Netherlands, it's common practice that you have some kind of repository of information and legal guidance that party can fulfill. In this case, the CC. In the Dutch case, that of the judge. And that's something that we pushed for from the Netherlands with the delegates, and that did enter at some point. So we were very glad to see that. And that was, definitely a team effort and just lots of perspectives coming together. And the second part was the fact that we, like, how do we kept in touch, as to your question. We did a Twitter space together with Damien Dutch during the convention as well, where everybody could join. And we also kept emailing. So we gave email updates on where we were, what the main discussion points were. Also, recently, there's going to be the definitions document. Again, we've requested everybody that joined the constitutional workshop for their input. So yeah, we're very interested to hear people's opinions because of the fact that their input has already resulted in, well, I would say, significant changes to the Cardano Constitution. There was this guidance documentation. Number two was the discussions that we had in Den Haag about the ultimate beneficial owner of ADA, which basically means who gets the voting rights. And that language has also changed in the Constitution. And number three was also the updatability of the Constitution itself. So we saw already in our workshop in Den Haag that there were just too many unknowns and even unknown unknowns. So the importance of being able to update this constitution was significant, and that's something that we pushed for very hard as well.
Absolutely, that makes sense. The convention implemented a number of consensus building techniques like temperature checks, which is something that's come up quite frequently also online. How did these methods influence the quality of discussion and decision making?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, there's a balance to walk when hosting these kind of things. And I think Lloyd and yeah, the entire team did really well there. Can you remind me what the name was of that consultancy company that was helping in all these efforts? I thought they did a fantastic job, but the name is just escaping me. Maybe if it comes to you, let me know. But yeah, I mean, temperature checks were a way to get an idea for where the momentum was in the room. And I mean, similar to this equation, PV equals nRT from physics, and the ideal gas, and how you measure, uh, what's the pressure given certain constraints. You're looking at how to make sure that the momentum is going while not over pressuring your governance discussion. So I think it was a great tool. I think what was especially important for using the temperature checks as a tool was that the questions were framed correctly. And that was probably one of the most important things, because if the questions for the temperature check were not framed correctly, that could completely change the entire dynamic of what the purpose was of a temperature check. But thankfully, there was always a way before the temperature check to be carried out that the entire community of delegates could give their input before the vote would take place. So that was very good.
Makes sense. That I really like that physics analogy. That is really helpful. That makes a lot of sense. Looking back at the process, what would you say surprised you most about working with delegates from many different cultural and geographic backgrounds?
The beautiful diversity of ways of thinking. That's it.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And that is a really succinct way to put it. Absolutely. On a more maybe difficult note, were there any specific challenges that you encountered during the convention? And in what ways did you work with other delegates to overcome those challenges, if any?
Yeah, so I mean, we had one at the beginning for what was Article 7 and then became Article 8, which was about the updatability of the Constitution. Um, what we originally suggested was, due to the fact it was so important that this Constitution undergo an update, given that we were already in the knowledge that we were doing an imperfect job, given that we didn't have all the information at hand by which to design the perfect constitution, as Cardano had never seen its own governance in action. And that's the reality, is you're trying to design something without seeing the practical implications of how those designs actually operate. And that's why the updatability of the Constitution was such a pivotal discussion for others and myself, um, whereby in the Kenyan workshop that we had, the original synthesis, the first synthesis workshop, I think it was, sorry, there was one before that in South America. But there we really pushed on how do we ensure that there's a fail-safe that this constitution gets updated. And I suggested that we put a limit in of 3 years after which within which the constitution had to be updated, but that was not the right suggestion in the end after some discussion. But still, this topic was so important to many of us that we actually, during the Kenyan workshop, just got a piece of paper, wrote down our sentiment without trying to provide a full solution, and started gathering signatures from the other delegates, just saying, this is crucial. We must update this constitution. And this was the only way we thought we could let that sentiment be properly conveyed to the civics committee and to all those involved in designing the constitution. And we did, and we emailed that and shared that, and we did see significant updates in the constitution on that part, where the constitution itself refers to itself as a living document, but also outside of the constitution itself, the context of the discussions were also very good, in the sense that we heard that there will be times that parties come together to update this constitution. So that has been allayed somewhat, but it really came down to gathering signatures on a piece of paper and just getting a bunch of delegates together and asking everybody to sign it. This is a real issue, and that's how it went. And that's I would say it was a productive way to resolve I wouldn't call it a conflict, but certainly a worry.
Absolutely. That sounds very productive. Straight to the point. What aspect of the final constitution, if you could pick one, makes you particularly proud? And what is it about it that makes you believe it'll benefit the wider community?
I think it's the input from the Dutch workshop, which was the guidance documentation. So empowering the Constitutional Committee to have guidance documentation that will help inform their decision making, but at the same time empowering the community at large with context on how the Constitutional Committee should be forming their opinion. Right? It's a two-way street. It's empowering everybody with knowledge and context. And that's all in the DNA of Cardano about transparency, due process, scientific rigor, first principles. And the fact that that has made it into the constitution is is great. Whether that was due to the Cardano or the Dutch workshop or not, I have no idea, to be honest. But I'm very glad that it made it in because it certainly wasn't in there when we first looked at the Constitution.
Absolutely. One final question. As we look to the future, what advice would you give specifically to other communities who are considering similar governance initiatives?
Well, it's to gather, well, to have a good philosophy and mission that will gather a great group of people together, because without a great group of people, you're not going to have an easy time making a great constitution or governance. Sorry. So the classic rule of inputs equals outputs persists, right? If you create a community around something trivial or uh, something that does not inherently motivate the right type of individuals to your vision or mission, the type of governance that you will form will reflect that. And I think that's something that Cardano did great from the onset. Props there to all of the founders, including, of course, Charles Hoskinson, with something as simple as a 45-minute talk and discuss the vision of how the world could potentially be better. And that is really what it comes down to, is being able to convey your ideas, right? And that's what brought so many great people together. So I would say, if you want to make great governance, become a great person, a great idea spreader.
Absolutely. Max, thank you so much for your time today and for your expertise. To me, this has been incredibly insightful, and I'm sure it will be for the wider community. And I am so excited for them to be able to hear what you have to say.
Thanks a lot, Paige.
It
And
was,
it was my pleasure.
it was all my pleasure. For GM Cardano, I am Paige Vidal.